What's good, everyone, and welcome back to AS level sociology lessons. I'm Faizan Himani, the socio guy. I just banged the mic and that's probably going to cause some disruptions in the audio, so please, sound guy, fix that in post. But anyways, it's great to be back and doing these lessons once again. If you want a refresher on my last AS level course, and specifically if you're watching this on YouTube, there will be a link somewhere above my head and there will be a link in the description box below. So before I dive into this topic that we're going to be doing today, the topic I previously covered was the fifth thesis, the jumping off point into P1 topic, family, and today we are going to be doing arguments against the fifth thesis. And in sociology, whenever we have a theory, we need to counter, refute, and negate that theory to give this varied perspective, this holistic perspective on social reality. So before I talk about these arguments that counter the fifth thesis, why don't I just give a quick breakdown of what the fifth thesis is. So the basic premise of the fifth thesis is that pre-industrial society was predominantly characterized by an extended family form, and then the processes of industrialization and urbanization led the family to becoming nuclear in nature. Now, our arguments kind of say that this wasn't true, that the extended family was maybe not the norm. Maybe there was a diversity of family forms. Maybe it was dependent on a host of other factors. So we have a number of theorists who argue against the fifth thesis. And the first of this is a theorist known as Finch. And she actually found historical evidence to suggest that in pre-industrial England, and mind you, our analysis is always from this English perspective because our books are written from an English perspective. So she found historical evidence to suggest that in England there was actually a diversity of family forms. There was nuclear families, there were extended families, there were single parent families, but mind you, single parent families caused by death, not by divorce. Divorce was relatively uncommon back then. It was mostly just death or maybe a separation, that's say, not a legitimate divorce in the eyes of the state. Aside from there being a diversity of family forms, she also said that this extended family structure, which the fifth thesis said was very supportive, very loving of each other, and was multifunctional in nature, she said that no, this is kind of a false premise. This system, this extended family, was not very supportive, and this is because of wider economic issues. Back then, standard of living was very low. There wasn't any universal health care. People's lives were generally miserable. I mean, anyone would be miserable if you were a dirt poor subsistence farmer, right? Back in the time where you had no medicine, you had no education system. So people really didn't want to support one another. They didn't really make provisions for one another. It was kind of just look out for yourself and ensure that, you know, you get enough food on the table, and you kind of have to compete against people. I mean, that's human nature, right? Competing against one another for survival. So she said that this structure wasn't really supportive. No one really took responsibility to take care of the elderly. And this is also because the elderly would become an economic burden, right? Once you reached a certain point, people would get inefficient. They wouldn't be able to do work on the farm effectively. And mind you, when I talk about the elderly at this point, this is in a day and age where germ theory was not realistic. People had no hygiene practices. There was no sanitation, no running water, none of these things. And the kind of work people did was back-breaking manual labor. So people would die at a relatively early age. If you reach the age of 50, you were considered a geriatric person in pre-industrial society, and you were considered very wise and stately, of course. But then again, you were kind of useless to the family, so what they did was kind of boot you out and send you to a hospice or a monastery somewhere. Now, this family structure was also very patriarchal. The fifth thesis kind of makes the assumption that all members were treated equally. While yes, women did play a crucial role in the economic part of the family by taking care of the animals, you know, sewing, cooking, helping out in field work, etc., just like the men. But divisions of power were highly unequal. This is a very patriarchal society, and as such, families didn't really make any provision for women in their wills. It was mostly the wealth and the power was then transferred down to the eldest born son. Now, as I previously said, this was a time period where social institutions were relatively, new or non-existent. There was no welfare state, no healthcare system, no education system, etc. And this brings us to the argument of Carlin. Why was it not possible to have an extended family form? He simply said that because of low life expectancy, people dying in their 40s, people dying in their early 50s, it was not possible to have these multi-generational families where you have an 80-year-old grandparent, a 50-year-old parent, a 30-year-old child, and then maybe a 15-year-old or a 10-year-old child of the child. People also used to have relatively early marriages and would give birth at a relatively early age as well. It wasn't uncommon to see girls giving birth at the age of 16 back then, or even 17. So birth rates were very high as well, and also infant mortality was very high at this point. So a lot of babies born would unfortunately just die within the first year, and this obviously greatly impacted life expectancy for the mother as well, and just generally kept family sizes small. Now, he also supported Finch's idea that this family network was not very supportive. What he said was that those who did die, or those who did move into old age, were then told to leave the family and, like I said, go live in a monastery or a hospice somewhere. Now, another counter argument to the fifth thesis is provided by Laslet. Now, Laslet said that this extended family type was not the norm in all strata of society, not in every social class. It was very class dependent. And the argument here is that the upper class at this time were predominantly, or chose to have an extended family form because they could afford to obviously feed the extra mouths. They had bigger houses. And the lower classes, or the working class, couldn't. They didn't have the room, they didn't have the space, and of course they didn't have the finances to either support all those mouths, and it didn't make sense for them economically. These notions are then echoed by Gordon, who said that this is, yes, it is a class-dependent choice whether to have extended or a nuclear family form, but he said that there's a confusion in the classification of families. Now, there is this thing known as temporary extended family and permanent extended family. Now, in the lower classes, we tended to have this temporary extended family because people would come and board and lodge with these, with their family members, or it could have been strangers just boarding and lodging with them for a short period of time. Think of it kind of like a 18th century, early 19th century Airbnb kind of deal. People come live with you for a short period of time, and back then maybe in order to pay for their dues they'd do some work around the house. And in the upper classes, Gordon said that it was kind of more permanent in nature because, like I said, they could afford to have the family members and they could afford to feed the extra mouths. Now, our last point that I'm going to touch on in this is the alternative to the fifth thesis. And the alternative to the fifth thesis posits that there was already an extensive nuclear family form in this pre-industrial society. And this family form, already being nuclear in nature, meant that they were geographically mobile, right? Now, it wasn't industrialization that caused the family to become nuclear and geographically mobile. It was the already pre-existing geographically mobile nature of family that assisted and aided industrialization, and by default kind of aided urbanization. So our alternative argument is saying that it wasn't industrialization that led to the nuclear family forming. The nuclear family already existed, hence it was geographically mobile, and hence it aided industrialization. So, well, this is a quick, little wrap up of the arguments against the fifth thesis, just touching here and there. I hope you found this informative. For any extra information on this, you can go check out the course book that we use, Chris Livesey. It's got a great set of arguments for it in a lot more detail. Until next time, take care. Cheers.
Peace, yo.